So welcome to Launch Stories. We're all about connecting and educating Chilliwack entrepreneurs, which is many of you amongst you would consider yourself entrepreneurs. I think everybody is an entrepreneur in their own right. So thank you so much for coming. Thanks for our sponsors for making these events happen. We have the Chilliwack Economic Partners and the Chilliwack Innovation Network. And we have a new sponsor this month, which is Stalo Community Futures through a grant from CIRA. So let's hear it for our sponsors. And in case you didn't know, CIRA is the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. So if you have a .ca domain name, that's where you're getting it through. And so Stalo, as well as SEPCO, put together a really great bid, and they're doing a lot of things for digital education and innovation. So really appreciate them getting involved. And thanks to our partners for doing the monthly heavy lifting to make this happen, and that's Cowork Chilliwack, Currency Marketing, and Zynum Ventures. Wow, there's like paparazzi and cameras on me, in addition to our own cameras. And a special thank you to Elise. She's running all of the AV, and you can see her there in her domain. And actually what you're seeing on that screen is the live show being cut. So we're going to do this 1-hour talk, and if Elise has hit all the right buttons, it's done and ready to post. And she's been doing just a fantastic job. So thank you, Elise. So I am thrilled to introduce you to our guest this evening. Please give a warm Launch Stories welcome to Tom Froese. Come on out, Tom. We'll do it. There you go. I'm not sure if we're shaking hands yet. So Tom, can I call you Tom? It's Mr. Tom on all of your materials.
Yeah, you can call me Tom. Yeah.
So you're an illustrator, a top teacher on Skillshare, and your most recent foray or adventure is into podcasting. And so we'll touch on all of those elements. And what I'm super interested in doing is kind of getting to the crux of, like, how have you made a business of this? How do you make it all happen? And so I've heard you speak before, and I think what you do is absolutely incredible and inspirational, and you all are going to be in for a treat here. So,
awesome.
So before we get started, because that website is you and your fully formed personage and professional right now, but if you roll back, tell me about you growing up. Where did you grow up, and what were some of the early things you were into?
Sure. I grew up north of Toronto in a town called Newmarket. Not a whole lot to do there, but I do remember drawing a lot and always being encouraged with like paper and pencils and crayons and paints and whatever just to get going. So that was a huge part of my, yeah.
Was your family, were there other artists in your family in and around you?
In the sense, like, did I have an extended family?
Yeah, were your parents artists, for example, or any siblings artists?
My dad was definitely very artistic. He ended up working more as a civil servant, but I think he had a little bout as like a little foray into graphic design, and he even like illustrated a kid's book that never actually got published, but we loved him to read it to us. And yeah, he was always drawing and being creative also. So, and music is in our family. All of us kids are very musical, drawing, that kind of stuff. So.
And so when you graduated, obviously art was a big piece of what you were doing in high school. But were you dead set on, I'm going to go to art school? Was that the destination?
I wasn't dead set on anything in high school except for maybe being a rock star. I was really into music and wanted to be in a band, and I did very poorly in my studies, and almost, I didn't even, like in Ontario we had grade 13 or OAC.
Right.
And I basically scraped by to just get my grade 12 diploma, and then, the whole art thing came later. Yeah.
Let's go back to the aspiring rock star.
Yeah.
Did you actually play guitar or drums or get into a band at all?
Yeah, it wasn't that delusional. I wasn't great, but I enjoyed it, and I had no prospects, but it was fun, and I thought maybe I could. It was just my obsession in high school, just to play music, and then eventually that became, I got my own computer and then started making music on the computer, and so I got handy with the computer, and then what I ended up doing out of high school was doing sort of this like, back then it was called the Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer, and it was around the year 2000. So it was a big tech boom, and this was going to get me like, fast track to like a white collar job kind of thing. And so that was the route I took at first, was getting.
So were you working on Y2K solutions
no,
at the time,
no.
or was it just after that?
No, I was just after that, and it was like IT. It was just like or like, what would it be called? Like tech support, basically, like getting people's like computers to work on the printer, basically.
Can I get you to reboot your computer, please?
Exactly.
Over and over again.
Yeah.
So then off to art school. When you made that decision, you must have looked at a variety of schools, and you ended up in Nova Scotia.
That's right, I did.
At NASCAD. I've said that correctly, I believe.
Yeah, NASCAD.
Which is a Nova Scotia Art and Design, College of Art and Design.
That's right.
Oh, blew it. And you were there from 2006 to 2009. Tell me about that time.
Yeah. So what got me there was, there's a lot of steps between like being in IT and then figuring out, I have this artistic background. I actually hate like network support stuff. Maybe I should reconnect with my artistic side. Very long story short, I actually ended up getting a job as a graphic designer because, sort of by virtue of the fact that I could use computers and I was young, so everyone just assumed that I could also do graphic design. And so I got a job as a graphic designer for 2 years at a trampoline company. And the logo still exists that I designed for them. It's called Spring Free Trampoline. And
Scream Free?
Spring Free.
Spring Free.
No screams. only fun screams.
Spring Free,
yeah.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah. And anyway, that was my new obsession. I wanted to be a graphic designer, and I knew that I needed to go to school for it. So I ended up, I looked at a few kind of local Toronto-based schools, but for some reason, I thought it would be good to get out of my world and do something totally different. And I thought about Emily Carr, but for some reason, really I only applied to NASCAD, and I said, if I get in, I'll go, and if I don't, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. And so I kind of, my sister was living in Halifax, or near Halifax, so it was sort of an influence there, but I think it was just this weird other place that I wanted to get out of Toronto and go somewhere else, and the East Coast just seemed kind of different and neat. So
I did a quick Google image search and found this image. I hope this is the campus.
This is, when you showed me that picture earlier, I was like, it's very nostalgic to look at that.
Is that the entire campus, essentially?
This is what would be called the Granville campus. So this would be like fine art. Most of the design, a lot of the design when I was there was here, printmaking and stuff like that. And then they have a newer campus across the city on the other side near the port. It's called the Port Campus. And then they have like industrial design and some design classes there. So.
And was that a 2-year or a 4-year course?
It was 4 years.
4-year, okay.
Yeah.
So
I kind of fast-tracked. I did it in 3 years. But,
got it.
Yeah.
And I know from the very beginning that you were interested in illustration. It kind of, while you were taking a graphic design degree, you were drawn to illustration. And tell me about this piece.
This was in my foundation year. We had to learn all the basics of art, like painting and drawing and stuff like that. And in one of our studio classes, we had to learn color theory. And so I'm not much of a painter. But I could use a computer because I was a graphic designer, and I was also very inspired by Eric Carle, the Hungry Caterpillar, Brown Bear. So I wanted to use that as my theme for the color project, and it was basically I'll paint with. We had to use gouache, so I would paint the gouache and scan it in, and then kind of mix the colors sort of physically, but sort of digitally, and ended up creating a little tiny kids book out of it. But I think that the reason I probably would have made a slide like this was just to show the early beginnings of my illustration. Like, I wanted to be a graphic designer. That's what I was in school for. But I also was doing illustration type stuff. I was always really inspired by kids' books and stuff like that. And this was particularly a style that I gravitated to, where it's kind of collagey and little.
What were some of the early software that you were using? Is this the Adobe tools?
It was always Adobe, yeah.
Got it.
So the Photoshop and a little bit of Illustrator, and I would put it all together in InDesign. So
cool.
Yeah.
Another early piece, this was also at school, I believe, was a magazine cover. And
that's right.
Again, some of the early indications of some of the stuff you would do later.
Totally, yeah. This is this is actually my first paid illustration project. And so I had type instructors who also they ran a studio in Halifax, and they had a lot of cool clients. And so I asked them if they ever needed help, let me know. And sure enough, they got me on this job, and this was my first paid illustration. Yeah.
Do you remember what you asked, money-wise?
Oh, I didn't ask. It was like, they just said, it probably would have been $200 or $300.
Okay, that's pretty good. Realistic.
So it was a cover and basically, I think 2 spreads on the inside, but I would have done it. I would have paid to have done it. Like, I wanted to.
Yeah.
I was hungry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think anybody is just trying to build out a portfolio, right? And
Exactly.
exercise, and designers, illustrators tend to undervalue themselves at the start, I imagine, and just give it away. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So you got your degree, and you were a full-fledged official, like, sheriff's badge graphic designer, and you headed west. You ended up in Vancouver in that industry.
That's right, yeah.
Tell me about that. Like, how did you make the jump from that side to this side of the country?
Okay, yeah. Toward the end of my time at NASCAD, we had to start looking for jobs. And so we had to put together a portfolio for our portfolio class. And of course, I sent that around to different places. I sent it to my friend Amanda in Vancouver. And I think I was just asking her, like, what she thought of it or whatever, like maybe some feedback. But what happened, what I later learned, is her boss saw my portfolio and got in touch with me independently. She just saw it over her shoulder and then found out who I was and got in touch with me independently and offered me a job. So Amanda later ended up being my wife, but
okay.
It's a long story, but yeah.
Wow.
Like, yeah.
Smooth.
Yeah, there's such a long story. If I get into it, we'll be here all night.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And so you went to work as a graphic designer. How big of a studio was this?
It was, I'm going to say, at the time, probably 8 or so people.
Okay.
Around 8 people. So it wasn't big. It was more boutique or whatever. And we had clients like UBC and Coast Capital and just very Vancouver. Yeah.
And again, you were looking for opportunities. They dubbed you, oh, this guy can draw. Well, he'll be the illustrator. And this was an early piece that you did in 2009, and it was for UBC.
That's right.
And again, in that similar kind of Eric Carle style in a way, right?
Exactly. This was more my Charlie Harper stage. And it's all like the same techniques, right? It's the same kind of, it's all basically how I know to make an illustration is you take a texture and then you turn it into something by adding lines over it. So, this was for UBC, and this was just like there was a lot of this happening at that job where I was an art director, designer, but they would also I would jump on any opportunity to, do the illustration part as well.
Cool. Another project, packaging. This was for Martin's apple chips.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. These you'll probably still see in some iteration at Starbucks and in the lineup where they have like the little chips and snack packs and stuff like that. So yeah, that was fun, and it's fun to see it. And I think these are the big bags that they used to sell at Costco.
Okay.
So I get photos sent to me from my brother or sister, like they're in Costco, like it's your apple chips. I'm like, oh, I did the lettering, I made the apple. I guess I made the logo too, but so yeah.
Yeah, and so this was, you were a hired gun doing it for a company and part of that and part of a team, but you had the inkling, I'm going to go out on my own. And so 2013 hits and you said, I'm going to be an illustrator.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was more of an internal discussion or debate, but what made you finally pull the trigger?
A little bit of angst and frustration. I was working as a design director at an advertising agency, and like a smaller advertising agency, and I was constantly finding myself just I was frustrated a lot creatively, and it's nothing about the agency that I was working for. It was just that I started to realize, like, I don't really want to be a designer in advertising. I don't want to do this, which was hard because I went to school for it. But I also kind of just had this, I was hanging out a lot with people who are more entrepreneurial and, freelance designers, letterers and stuff like that. And so I was really inspired to like try and just go out on my own. There was something about that really appealed to me. So I cut loose in basically 10 years ago and started with some design clients because that was what I was known for. And then whenever I could, I would just take on illustration-oriented projects as well. And yeah. And
so being Tom Froese, you did some really cool design work on your stationery, and it looks like letterpress to me. And
yeah, totally. Yeah. So it all kind of connects. Sorry if I cut off the question.
No, that's fine. And I know we're going to dig more into the business side, and I've shown a few of your samples, but what I did today is I went to your website, which is nicely refreshed, I see, as of like minted yesterday, I think.
Last week.
Last week,
close,
okay.
Yeah.
And I grabbed some samples now just to whet your appetite and frame our conversation, because Tom has gone from, I think I'm going to go independent, to now, if you list the client list, it's like, wow, this is incredible. And so I want to dig into that. But to begin with, let's just look at some of your most recent work. And this is you've done a number of different series for Amazon Web Services, which is a very big company.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
They come to me in different ways. Sometimes they'll reach out to me. They'll see something online, and sometimes they come to me through my agent. So I have a US-based agent, and he just does all the networking and stuff and finds stuff. But this one particular, I think they must have found me online and just emailed me directly. Yeah.
And so in that case, are you representing yourself? Like if it's coming in through your, or do you have to?
This is why I have an agent. So my agent isn't just there to, be out in the field and find me work. He also is a business partner. So I'm not much of a mind for pricing things. Like it's a dark art. And when Amazon comes to me, it's different than if, a local restaurant comes and like that, there's a big gap even for the same price. So I call in the big guns when bigger companies come, and he knows how to handle pricing at scale. So when bigger companies, they have a much, like the reason things are more expensive is just it's more valuable to them. It creates more value to them because they're using it in so many different ways, and they if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't do the pricing. I send that to my agent, and he takes care of that.
And early days of a graphic designer going on his own, or an illustrator going on his own or her own, it's how many hours is this going to take, right? And then the folly in that is it's somewhat ridiculous, because as you do this and the more proficient you get at it, theoretically it should become less time. And maybe you increase your hourly rate and so forth. But what you're talking about is value pricing, right? And having someone be able to negotiate that on your behalf, I imagine, is a lot easier for you.
It is. I still price a lot of local projects, especially if it's in Canadian dollars. But yeah, he does take care of that value-based stuff, which is like it's a whole thing that I kind of try to do, but he's a lot better at it. So
yeah. I think it's the same reason that other movie actors and musicians and artists of many stripes are represented, right? And in this day of being your own influencer or whatever it might be, there's still a space for that representation.
Yeah, totally.
So that's one of the pieces that stood out to me. Another one was for Yahoo, and this is something that you've talked about in the past, is your fascination with typography and creating your own typefaces, and how do you get to be the guy that puts a special occasion Yahoo logo?
I have no idea why I was the guy for this. I think you get work out there, and if people find it and they like it, they resonate with it, and they hire you. They end up in positions at Verizon, which is somewhere in the Yahoo sphere,
right.
and they enlisted me for this. So every time there was a holiday, they wanted me to do this tiny little thing that was like, right up in the screen. And so this was definitely a fun exercise. There's a New York-based design ad agency, very well known, called Pentagram, and they actually redesigned the Yahoo brand about a year into this project with them. And I did their first logo for Halloween, and it was like a ghost kind of riding on their brand new logo. I was like, there's no way they're going to let me do this. And the whole project was canned after that. So, and I don't blame them. It was a beautiful new logo. So they had that like kind of, it looked the most like that turkey one there.
Yeah,
that's
like
kind of like how
that.
their letters used to be, and now it's very
Right.
like, I think it's like purple Futura, very like
Yes.
corporate now.
So what does a creative brief look for Thanksgiving Yahoo logo? Like, are you given carte blanche, or are you given some direction?
Yeah, well, that was the first one I did with them, so it was a little bit more like get to know you kind of thing. So there was a bit more conversation about it, but it's really like we want to do. They didn't say it, but I was like, you want me to do a Google Doodle for your Yahoo?
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, but don't say that. It was basically like, we want to, the questions or the conversations around like, how much freedom do I have? What are the things I need to stick to, and what is my freedoms? And I thought I'd have to like at least incorporate their actual logo and then just embellish it a bit. But this one was surprisingly like, no, as long as it fits within this little dimension, it's tiny, like super tiny, and they needed it for like mobile and like slightly different sizes depending on the context. But they just were like, as long as it's readable at these sizes, and they test it, and and so by the time I got onto I guess it was Christmas was the next one, like I just kind of got the hang of it. It's like, okay, as long as they can read it and it's the concept and it's like politically neutral or whatever,
right.
then yeah.
Because it's so tiny, I'd be so tempted to like try to sneak something in there.
Oh.
But that's why you got the job.
I felt like I sneaked in there just by getting to do it. So.
Fair enough. And then these are some wonderful art prints that you did recently for Hemlock. And this touches on a piece of a fascination you have, or a different expertise in map design.
Yeah.
Like, where did that come from?
The map thing, I've just always loved maps. Like I'm a big fan of like old ephemera, like vintage packaging maps, and go to MCC or like Salvation Army or wherever, and just look for old maps. And at a certain point, I was like, I want to illustrate a map too. I want to do one too. So I just happened to start doing it just through editorial work that I would do. And what I like about maps is that, I mean, it's easy for me to enter. They're hard to do because they're like, they take a long time. But conceptually, you know what you need to include. I need a map of Vancouver. I want to showcase all the like 10 vegan restaurants in Vancouver. So you know what like you know what the map has to be. You know what you have to illustrate on the map, and then it's just really fun to make those little illustrated bits look as cool as possible. So I like maps because of that structure and that certainty. But then there's a lot of room to make it a lot more fun than you might expect. So
got it.
Yeah.
This is way too far down into the weeds, but when you open that file in Photoshop, how many pixels by how many pixels?
Oh, for like something like this?
Yeah.
These ones were actually on the larger side because it was a specialty printing, and they were large, and I had to work at print resolution, which is 300. So I can't remember the actual pixels, but there's actually a little bit of a trick. It's probably not super interesting to most people, but one of my most popular videos on YouTube is about how to make large format prints or large format illustrations and murals using Photoshop. And you actually only need about 25 or 50 DPI for things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So that's a taste of some of Tom's work. Let's move on to your influences. And this is going to be rapid fire. You touched on a couple of them. But this is Paul Rand.
That's right. Yeah.
Tell me about Paul Rand.
I guess I'm just drawn to illustration that, like, it's sort of like, and you look at that like, I could do that. You like there's something so simple and playful about it, and it invites you to try it yourself. And that's pretty much what happened with Eric Carle as my first influence in doing that, color project. Is like, oh yeah, I could do that. I might not do it as well but you can kind of see the parts. You can see how it works. It's collage, it's construction paper, and so I think I'm just drawn into that sense of like, this is something I can do. I could never paint a realistic or an impressionistic painting, or I'm not even interested in doing that for some reason, maybe because it just feels like so outside of my world. But this, for whatever reason, just speaks to me. Maybe there's some. I also just really like the retro factor about it. Like, I just like how it feels. And with Paul Rand specifically, he's no slouch. He is very. He's basically the godfather of modern graphic design in America. So, and he's written amazing books. He has amazing, insightful essays that I just really resonate with. And so he's basically my biggest influence, and I would call him my sort of mentor, if you will. Yeah.
And he's probably more known, or equally known for brand development. Like
exactly.
IBM and UPS and many of the iconic early brands that we think of, right?
Exactly. So many brands that we still use today, particularly IBM, it's almost unchanged. And the Cummins logo that you see on pickup trucks, he did that. So he's a serious designer and also writes very eloquently. And so he helps me make sense of, like I would read an essay about how, some experience working with clients, and it's like, oh, he's explaining something that I've experienced too. So and so many layers of Paul Rand.
Cool.
Yeah.
Next one is Miroslav Sasek.
I was corrected about how to say this from someone on the internet. They said it's Shashek. So
okay.
You talk like Sean Connery and Miroslav Shashek.
You have to get onto the rock to get off the rock.
Exactly. Just like that. So yeah, Miroslav Shashek. I can never say it like that. I still say it the way you said it. But again, I mean, you just something playful and stylized about his work. you know what it's about. It's about New York, it's people, but there's something very playful, and I felt very invited in to make work that is along that vein.
Mm-hmm. And you've talked about it before, but it's this notion of you almost need to imitate to become your own artist, to have your own style down the road. And so that took some time for you. It was more imitative to start, and then now you've created your own style and so forth. And another one that you mentioned already is Eric Carle, and many of us probably saw these books when we were kids or have read them to our kids. And you're right, it does look so simplistic, but it's complex in its simplicity. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Another one is Ben Shahn.
Ben Shahn, yeah.
What drew you to this type of illustration?
I'd say for him, I'm just moved by his drawings. His line work is so expressive and simple at the same time. I love the complexity. This is just one of many of his, compositions. I mean, subject-wise, and just, he drew a bunch of choirs, music stands, and chairs, right? And so I think there's something beautiful about what he made, and the way he can transform that mundane thing into something kind of beautiful. But if you look at his work, it's very expressive.
And so your influences are old in many ways, and predate any kind of computer technology, and yet you've, from the very get-go, all of your illustration, not all of it, but it's been highly digital, although it doesn't look digital in my mind whatsoever. Like, how do you, that jump from that?
Right. Yeah, I think all along I've always taken what he's, what like someone like Ben Shahn or Paul Rand or Miroslav Šašek, I knew they work painterly, but I also knew that I don't know how they did it. Like, I don't know how they controlled their brushes in such a way to get all these clean lines and like fields of color and stuff like that. But I knew how I might approximate it digitally. And so just sort of I'm a hack. And just sort of like, well, I'll do my best approximation of that. And so, yeah, it does start imitative and sort of simplistically. And then eventually, over time, I just want to try new things, or I find a way of being more efficient, or I get tired of something and want to try something new. And that's how things kind of evolve very slowly, I guess.
I'll buzz through a couple more of your early influences. Charlie Harper, you mentioned him.
Yeah.
And again, similar but different. What draws you to his work?
It's the same thing. It's just like textures and color, and then shapes that enclose it. So you have this kind of analog, handmade quality to it, but you also have this mechanical, more precise quality to it, and there's something that there's a lot of expression and play you can do within that. Yeah.
And then finally, this was a couple, I believe, Alice and Martin Provensen.
Yeah.
I don't know of this duo. Tell me about them.
I think they invented Tony the Tiger.
Okay.
So that, like, the Tony the Tiger we know today is super like
right, 3D
and whatever. Yeah. But like the first Tony the Tiger on the first Frosted Flakes, they illustrated or whatever, designed. So again, so I picked up this book. These are from a book of like poems that they illustrated, and I found it in like a garage sale, a church garage sale in Halifax while I was there, and I was like, I love these illustrations. There's just something like I've always just loved retro things, and over the years I've kind of been able to identify what I like about it. I just like they always have a very designy, like they're not as arty, they're more designy. They're flat and stylized, and the colors are always printed in a way that it's more printmaking oriented rather than painting. And so I think and just playful, like, and I love the way they compose their images with very simple backgrounds. They have, they don't need to show every single detail to make it feel lively. And in fact, what makes these things so lively is that they don't add every detail. They're very selective, and they tell a story just by magical decisions that they're able to make in terms of like what to put where and stuff like that. So,
do you have any insight into how a couple would work on something like this? Was it working on individual pieces? One would do one would do another, or?
Yeah, I've never actually looked into that about which one did what. I just assumed that they both sort of were like good at drawing in the same style, and you're like, hey, New York Times called me today. Can you take that on today, and I'll keep working on the kids' book? Or like, I just imagine that's my guess.
Well, so that was some of your early influences, and then you've now developed your own style and voice, and I want to dig into that. I found this illustration that you did at one point that talked about my style, and I'm curious, 5 years later, if this still represents what your style is.
Yeah, it's interesting. Was it 5 years ago that?
I think it was 4 years.
4 years ago, yeah. I mean, style's an ever, like, you can come at it in different angles, but I think I was just, I mean, as an illustrator, I'm constantly thinking about the style aspect, like what does what I make look like? And it's like a brand in a way, like how can I keep it consistent, but how can I keep pushing it? How can I use this limited range of things that I do to do all these things in such a way that it all kind of relates back to it itself. It looks like it's from me, and it does come from me in this authentic way. So I think in this one, I can't remember exactly what my context, like what my point was, but I was basically saying like, there's this technique that I have, which are the physical qualities, the tools that I'm using, and the techniques that I'm using them with result in these physical qualities that you see there. And then the intangible qualities would be more sort of like the things that are coming from within in a more, it just is part of who I am. So I'm a bit silly when I make art, and that comes through in it. And I think that the idea here is like, it's good to define what your physical qualities and intangible qualities are so that you can choose to lean into them more and leverage that on purpose rather than just kind of not really know why your work looks like it does. I think it's good to be a little bit more analytical and to put words on what those qualities are. And then you can choose to lean into it or walk away from it or whatever.
I like buoyant and lively. Do you think that's still descriptive of what you're doing?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Another thing that you mentioned it, a collector, things like retro or nostalgic vintage postcards. All of these things have had an influence, and so it's almost like you're an old soul trapped inside a 2023 person. Right?
You know, I think I don't like things that overwhelm me. I mean, or things that feel like too much or maximum. And when I look at older things, there's a simplicity to it. The shapes are always like very just that shape. And I'm just looking at this postcard here. Like there's something very earnest and like this is like a specific thing. Like this sign is called a Gucci style sign because it has these shapes, and then the way they have type, and it's a little bit like Jetsons. But there's something very, like you just don't get that anymore. Everything has to be like blinged out a little bit more with a drop shadow, or nowadays it's like 3D, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I can roll with a lot of the stuff that we have today, but I like the simplicity of older things. I like the simple technologies that they would have used to make them look that way. And I like that they're constraints that in many ways they didn't choose those constraints. The constraints were what they had to work with, and that's why things look that way. And so I use those constraints so that I can be more creative and do the actual creative work and not think about all the decisions, possible decisions that I could be making. Like it's like if I can just work in 3 colors, then I'm not worried about how 18 colors work together.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so you went from the thriving metropolis of Vancouver, and in 2015, 2 years into your freelance independent, you said, I'm going to move to Yarrow.
Yeah, that was a weird one.
What drove you to Yarrow?
I read a book about farmsteading. So I took a month off in 2014. We were still living in Vancouver. We had just like our youngest was maybe 6 months or something like that, and so we were driving in the interior and we stayed at this like farmstead Airbnb type place, and they had chickens, and they had this book about like living off the land and going, this was written in the 30s.
Let me guess, it was an illustrated book?
It wasn't illustrated,
okay.
It was all words, which is crazy because I don't read.
Okay.
But it was, anyway, the long story short is I was very inspired to try being more like farmy or something. And so we ended up finding out about the Eco Village, which is in Yarrow, and ended up renting there for a little while.
Okay.
Just to get a feel for it. But I mean, that transition, when I just remember being in the moving truck going over the bridge and, across, is it the Alex Fraser Bridge?
Portman,
thank you. I've been away so long I can't remember.
Yeah, you haven't been back.
I didn't grow up here, but yeah. Anyway, going over the bridge and feeling like, oh man, this is permanent. Like we're moving out of the city, and I'm not a country boy. And so, the first couple of years were a little bit hard, and I was a bit restless, but now like there's no going back. I love it here.
And you mentioned starting a family.
That's right, yeah. So we started it all in Vancouver, but every time, well, we only had 2 kids, but every time we had a kid, we moved a little bit more east. And so we were like, we both like work from home. We don't need to worry about like living in a condo. Like we could have a backyard. So let's look at our options. We looked at everywhere in Canada, and for some reason, Yarrow was it. So ended up, yeah.
Well, that's some background. Now I want to get into the business of illustration. Like how do you've carved out, essentially you've said, rather than getting a paycheck and them taking deductions, I'm going to start my own business. And in many ways, that's overwhelming. So how did you ease into that? How did you get to the point where this is just some of his clients? It's really phenomenal, but it didn't start like that. Like, how did it start?
Just, I didn't really, I feel like when you're a freelance designer or illustrator, you don't set out to start a business. You just, like for a lot of people, that's like the only option is like, you either work for a company or you work by yourself, and you figure it out as you go along, and it's sort of, I have this analogy where like people ask like, how did you make the jump?
Right.
And I'm like, well, if you imagine like you're in like Fast and Furious or whatever, and you're like, there's these, I've never watched the movie, but but I'm just imagining fast cars, okay? And they're driving together, but they're really fast. One car is your current job, and the other car is your dream job, and you're driving fast on the highway. You could it'd be a little dangerous, but you could jump from one car to the next, right? That car's moving, right? Whereas if that other car was at a standstill, that's your dream career, and you're going, and you try and jump off of it, it's not going to go so well. So that's kind of how it is. It's like I didn't just jump out of a job. I had a few things going on the side, enough momentum that making that jump wasn't fatal. So, and then just you build up the way anyone climbs a ladder or builds up a career within a business. Like it's just you build up your rapport, you build up your reputation a little bit, and next thing you know, Amazon Web Services is knocking on your door. So I'm
relating it to today, and many of these things are romanticize. Like what you're describing now is, oh, you need to have a side hustle, and that side hustle will be something you grow into, or you figured out that you could work from home before, like work from home was an actual like term.
Right.
How have you been able to just set your own course and say, this is what I'm going to do? And so just back up a second. You were feeling not fulfilled entirely in your agency job. How many side pieces were you doing at that time? Was it a few here and there?
There was enough that I felt like there's some, like I think I can do this. It wasn't my first time though. I tried a year or two before that, and it was like I tried. My wife was working at a nice big agency in Vancouver, so she was bringing home the bacon, taking care of everything, and so I had that it was comfortable enough for me to do that. Over like 4 months or something, I made $1,000. I'm like, this isn't working. So I went back and got a job, and I was miserable in all those jobs. Miserable is a strong word, but often miserable, restless, and I just knew that there is a sort of personality thing where like some people just like, if I'm going to survive and do this, I need to work for myself, because I just need to be able to be in control of certain decisions that are being made or not being made. And so there's that temperament part of it. But I think the first time was more like a jump, like to a still car, like, but I had that safety net of my wife working, and then you could just kind of read the signs around, like, okay, I have these lined up, and if I want to take on that other thing that just came, I'm not going to be able to do my job at my actual job, and so you do have to make small risks, take small risks. You don't know what the future is, but that's exciting. That's way more exciting to me than saying, what if?
And how did you broach that with your employer? Did you just sort of quietly do this on the side and it was understood, or did you say, hey, I want to do this stuff? Are you okay with that?
I had it at a certain point. I said, like, I didn't just ghost the job. I was just like, just so you know, I'm not happy here. I'm gonna go.
Okay.
I'm gonna quit. And of course, we talked about an exit strategy, and I'm not gonna like leave them high and dry. And I know that they invested in me to build up my position or whatever. So I don't know. One thing that I've always done is tried to always communicate and be super honest. And be like, own the responsibility that I have in the moment. So for instance, I had just taken on a job with a company that I was so about, and then my dream job came, and they said, we have a position for you. Like an agency that I really wanted to work for in Vancouver. And sure enough, it came just after I accepted this other position. But I accepted the position, and so I was like, "This is the way it's going to play out." And if I just believe that if you act that way, there's two things. Like, first of all, you just have. I couldn't feel good if I didn't own that, but I also feel like things will work out. Like, I don't need to worry. I try not to worry about those things. So,
and initially, your potential clients were those agencies.
Some of them, yeah. Some of my first big illustration breaks, like Characters, DDB. I did some kind of temp work for them, but they came to me for a pretty big illustration project, and yeah.
And has that changed? Are you now more direct with the corporations you're working for? Is it some of it still through agencies?
It's like, am I just getting my own businesses coming directly to me versus through agencies? I actually like the projects that come to me through agencies because they manage the art direction.
Right.
And then it's sort of like, think of like a contractor hiring all the trades. Like, I'm a trade who comes in versus having to manage all the trades. If I'm working directly to a business, I have to wear more hats. I have to wear my design hat. I have to wear my art director hat, which can be fun sometimes, but it takes time out of the time I take to illustrate, which and you're not always, it's not always being compensated for equally. So.
And is there a difference between a freelance, in that case, an illustrator versus a designer? Because it seems like illustrators get to put their name on it, for example, in many cases, versus a designer who's really unsung hero, who's behind and can't even put it in their portfolio and things like that, right?
Yeah. Could you imagine having, like, you're a designer? Is anyone here a designer? You are a designer, so I'll talk to you. Could you imagine being a designer and, like, you do a website, but then at the bottom you scroll your signature? You don't do that, right? It's not a thing. And Paul Rand did it, but usually only on his. He wouldn't do it on every logo that he designed. But if he illustrated something, or did a book jacket or something like that, there his name was. That's kind of an old school thing. Right. Maybe I do, but there is a difference between, I think the illustrator does get to be a little bit more front and center, and I do like that. I don't like blending into the background as the anonymous designer, because the anonymous designer won't be invited to do something that is, in my opinion, the fun part, whereas the illustrators are the ones doing the zany, turkey Yahoo logo, and they get away with it. And I don't know. I think that can just be a lot more. That's just a lot more attractive to me.
We touched on it, but the representation. So you mentioned you've got a U.S. agent. It looks like you also have a UK European agent, and then in Canada we can phone Mr. Tom and maybe negotiate. How does that work? Like, and can you talk to, like, where's most of your work coming from? Is it primarily U.S. or is it a mix?
I'd say the majority of, like, it varies from year to year. It really does. And last year and this year are very different years from 2021. But it had been trending mostly US based. But I'd say it's really a mix. I still get a lot of Canadian based work, like Canadian Geographic just gave me a job today, and, like, so I still take jobs, and I think it's hard to really quantify how much I'm getting from any one, but generally speaking, I'd say my most profitable region would be the US.
I see most of your Canadian samples are from companies that have Canada in their name, like Air Canada, Canadian Tire, you just mentioned, Canadian Geographic. So you've cornered the market on Canada. Yeah,
that was a little bit strategic at first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. You've now coupled this with teaching, and you are a top Skillshare teacher.
A top teacher, yeah.
What does that mean?
On Top Teacher, it's really like their most engaged teachers, the ones that are getting the most student engagement on their classes, and they reach a sort of certain quality. I mean, Skillshare, up until very recently, was very, like, it was like YouTube. Anyone could make a class, and it was very different quality levels depending on who made it. And so they look for a certain, I'm not saying, like, mine are always amazing production quality, but there's a certain amount of thought that goes into it, and so that things like that is what gets you that spot.
So Skillshare is a learning platform with a variety of different courses. If I subscribe to Skillshare, right?
That's
then
right.
I can pick and choose what courses I take.
That's right, yeah.
How are you compensated? Is it based on how many people click and actually take your course?
Yeah, it's royalties based. So
Got it.
You get paid per minute,
Wow.
which sounds like petty or something, but it adds up.
So when you do your videos, do you slow them down? You are very methodical in the way you talk.
I'm very long-winded. I do make long classes, not on purpose. It just happened. I'm very thorough. And so if people do watch our videos in halftime, like, or double time or whatever, we get paid half.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so you've had 120,000 people take your courses, and they're primarily around illustration and learning techniques. I think you have a dozen courses now. Has there been a difference in, like, you did your first course. How did you figure out how to do a course?
They initially approached me, this like 2015 or so, and they said, we'd like you to make a class kind of around the style that you're working in. And so it was kind of like, oh, okay, how would I? And I came up with that class, Inky Illustrations, that you can see there. It was really about how to combine physical media and digital media, which was the whole thing, right? Cutting out shapes using Photoshop, blah, blah, blah. And I've moved since to making more comprehensive classes that are more about attacking a bigger subject, like how do you work with color as an illustrator? How do you tackle that infinitude of 16 million possible colors on the computer and just boil, like how do you make that? A lot of my classes boil around the theme. How do you cut through all the choices and just choose something and feel good about it?
And so there's Skillshare, there's Udemy, there's lynda.com. It became LinkedIn Learning, I think. And how did you? They picked you, it sounds like. Did you shop around, or you just said, wow, this looks cool, let's give it a whirl? It's
just one of those things that I tend to play things where they land a lot, and Skillshare came to me first, and I just went with them, and it worked out. At first, it was paying for our heating bill, and then it was paying for our mortgage, and then... So it was like, this works. And it like, the question might be like, why don't I just, get my own audience and host my own classes? Because I don't want to do all the work around marketing and getting new audiences. Skillshare is always marketing and doing that work for their teachers. They're doing all that legwork and everything, and they have the platform and the reach, and I can just kind of be a part of that. So that's working out for me, and I'm sure there are better ways to do it if I did some exploration, but it's working.
I think one of the things that many creatives do their entire career is they're hired to do a commission or a project or something that has a start, middle, and end, and they're paid for either by the hour or by the value. And you've found something that you can get paid when you're sleeping. And you mentioned it's incrementally gone up. Could you, in broad strokes, tell us, if you're comfortable, in percentage-wise, what's coming from the illustration versus the courses?
Yeah, up until about last year, like I said, like the pandemic and everything kind of just messed all those numbers up. But it had been around 75% Skillshare income and 25% like other work.
Wow. I was thinking the opposite.
Like you can almost invert the work that I put in. Like I would spend 75% on the illustrations, and classes do take a long time. It's a bit of it's not quite accurate to say that I'm making money while I'm sleeping, because those classes take a lot, and I pay a lot for the production in some of my classes. And so it is passive income, but there's also, you got to feed it. Keep it going. Yeah.
Are you self-producing, or do you have a producer that's helping you with the video, for example?
Yeah, I use I have used Cassiar for, I believe, 3 of my productions, and they're expensive because they're really good and organized, and they have all the gear. And then every other one I just self-produce, and sort of regret it every time I self-produce because of how long it takes. But it's.
And have you found there's a difference between how they perform? Not really?
Actually, it's hard to say. My most popular class is Sweet Spots, I believe, or Odd Bodies. Actually, Odd Bodies and Sweet Spots kind of rival each other. I produced Odd Bodies using iMovie and a camera that kept going out of focus.
Okay.
And Sweet Spots was full-on production. Cost over, I think it was like $16,000 to produce or something like that. It was a lot. But I knew it was gonna pay off eventually, and it did. Sweet Spots just was lucky though, because that launched lucky/unlucky. Like the pandemic hit, everyone was going to learning online, and Sweet Spots was right there to catch all that. So
your thumbnails are brilliant. Your names of your courses are brilliant. I imagine in a sea of choices on Skillshare, they must just pop out, right? And
I mean, they help. The team at Skillshare will advise. I'll show them my name ideas, and they're like, "Oh, we think this one looks better. It fits the SEO stuff," and so that they do help me, rather than having super long name like, choosing colors for illustration, which one should you choose, or something like that. That wasn't one of the ones I pitched, but I do like alliteration and things that are kind of like catchy or sticky. Yeah.
Cool. Now you've added a third leg to your tripod, and that's podcasting. When did you start that?
I started in, I guess, November, and it was basically I love to write, and I love to talk about what I write about or whatever. There's just something, I like that creative challenge. And I was doing a lot of that on YouTube, but I'm not much of a good YouTuber. I couldn't really crack that, and I didn't really want to do all the work to make amazing YouTube videos. And there's just something that got stuck, and it all came to a head in November. And I was like, I'm a podcaster. I'm not a YouTube guy. So I just switched over to a podcast format, and it's been a lot better. Basically, I write an essay, and then I recite it, or I perform it on camera and on audio, and I just format it like a podcast. And it's a lot more. It's like bringing together the fact that I like writing, and that I like talking on camera, I guess, I like to disseminate my recordings or whatever.
So it's an introspective podcast for creative people. Who's your target audience?
Illustrators. I would say probably not all illustrators, just illustrators who happen, usually just the beginner or the late bloomer, people who are trying to do what I like, all the early stuff that I had to do too. And it's sort of like, here are the things that I learned and that I wish I knew starting out, those kinds of things. But also, I enjoy like thinking about, the reason it's introspective is like we all experience like different emotions while we're creating, or doubts, or we're struggling with something, or we're like, in my case, I'm always overwhelmed by too many options, and should I put it here or there, and spend half a day trying to figure out, which corner should it go in? And I know that sounds super trite, but to talk about that experience, I believe is, I'm finding like people in comments and stuff are telling me like, I'm glad other people are like talking about this, right? It's like you find community in that. And I find it fascinating to just write from that perspective. And I don't think there's any podcasts that are writing. A lot of them are tips and tricks and, how to and listicles. And I'm more of like, I'm going to just write about how I think about these things. So sometimes they're a bit more flowy and meandery. And yeah.
So your thumbnails, you're treating them like a project that's been given to you by American Express or Amazon, or they're amazing.
Thank you.
I'm ashamed that I'm going to take this recording and I'm going to put a thumbnail on that's going to take me 5 minutes, and then I'm going to post it to YouTube. And this is just absolutely amazing. Just the care and attention you put into everything. It's well done. So
thank you. Yeah, I'm inspired a lot by another podcaster. His name's Andy J. Pizza. He has a podcast called the Creative Pep Talk, which has been going. It really was the podcast that inspired me to make a podcast myself. And he illustrates every episode, and like he's able to do things like make calendars with them, and it becomes more than, so it just creates new opportunities to be creative. It gives me something interesting to do for myself that's not client work, but it also, like, who knows, maybe down the road they'll be useful for something. And yeah.
How do you see this fitting into your business? Is
like
it
the podcast?
Yeah. Is it feeding the Skillshare courses? Is it driving commissioned work, or is it just really just feeding your soul?
At this point, it's a sort of just a venture out into, like I said, it's a step away from YouTube, which was a gambling addiction for me. I was making videos and seeing no action, and I kept doing it, and I was like, no, I can't do that anymore. So this just feels more like just a very natural outpouring for me. And of course, eventually I want to monetize it somehow and get sponsorship. That's really just the first obvious step. Right now, I pay an editor to edit it for me, so this is costing me money. I pay for my platform, so I spend, embarrassing amounts of money per month to keep it going. And if I have to keep doing that, if it starts to hurt, I'll probably have to pull back. But my hope and belief is that it's actually going to be bigger than that. That's
another piece that I didn't actually make slides for or anything is you do speaking, and I imagine this will help feed some speaking opportunities. You've had a lot of design and illustration conferences and speaking to the industry and so forth. And well done.
Such as here.
Exactly. I'm going to blast through a few more examples of your work because I just think it's amazing, and then we'll turn it over for Q&A. So
Sure.
we'll do a quick take on these. And so this is, you mentioned local work, and I thought these are amazing. This is for Burger, a new burger joint, and they have at least 2 locations, and so these are illustrations you've done for them.
That's right, yeah. I think like the fact that I got to do a map and get paid for it in my stomping grounds was really cool. So,
And so, speaking for a friend, do you ever take any of the work that you've done and adapt it for a different client?
Very rarely. It's actually like so much of the stuff that I do is so specific. Like I could maybe take the giant hamburger and use it as an icon in a map somewhere else. But there's usually something about what I did here that only even just stylistically relates to here. The way I use the color, or there's something about it that I'd still have to like do extra work to get it to look right in its new context, that I might as well just do it again.
Right.
Yeah. So very rarely.
Fraser Commons, I believe this is in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And this is behind their bar, essentially, or their
checkout or
checkout.
till. Yeah.
And then you also did some spot illustrations for them as well. And so you have, when I heard you talk before, you've settled on pointy noses and pointy shoes. And I see you're still doing that, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm actually like sort of trying to grow out of it a little bit. Like I'm not as like adamant that the pointy nose and the pointy boot are like the be all end all of my style, but it was just something fun that I rode for a while. Yeah.
This is for Adirondack Life. I picked one that I couldn't even say. So animals show up a lot in your work as well, and at one point you kind of shied away from figures and people and animals, and what got you over that?
How did you know that?
I've done my research. I've listened to some things.
Yeah, well, eventually, magazines, like a magazine art director comes to you and says, we need this, and we'd like to have people. And at a certain point, you just like get sick of saying, well, I don't draw people. And also just creatively, like I started doing more like abstract type things, where it was like arrangements of objects, and maybe I'll show a hand or something. But eventually, you just want more tools to work with, so you learn how to do it. Yeah.
This is another one, a magazine for Magazine Georges. What client is that?
That's a French magazine. It's actually Magasin Georges. So
Got it.
I'm not sure I said it any, but yeah, it's a French magazine out of, I think it's Paris. Just a kid's, like a fun little independent magazine, and I just had fun with that one.
Airbnb Germany. We actually have a German in the audience. We have an international student from Berlin. Does this?
Or it's probably not. Is that the right word?
And you've done a whole series for Airbnb. And what was this particular project around?
Very niche. It was like they wanted to inform their hosts, because Europe is having a energy crisis due to the war. They wanted to give their hosts tips and tricks for how to save energy, basically, like, have a water saving shower head, make sure you maintain your radiator, that kind of thing. Have certified appliances that are energy efficient or whatever. So that's really what these were about, and they were on a little microsite. It sounds so unglamorous to put this. It was like a printout PDF that their host could have and display. So it was like, yeah,
cool.
It wasn't like in a magazine or anything, but I still really like the illustrations.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's hear it for Tom. That's fantastic for sharing.